I know that you are a specialist in Iranian affairs, so I'm going to stick to the Israel-Iranian conflict for now. You made a radical prediction in your piece in the Foreign Policy magazine that a second war between Israel and Iran could erupt by the end of the year, within the next few months. Are you still sticking to that timeline?
I mean, I'll be frank with you. I will be the happiest person on the planet if it turns out that I'm wrong. But so far, I have not seen any signs that would reassess my view of where we are likely to go. One factor that potentially will complicate this is the fact that the Israelis overreached with their attack on Doha. This has backfired. It does not mean that necessarily they will not attack, but the fundamental reasons as to why I think the Israelis are looking for a second round here, I think are still valid. And if you want, I'll be happy to go over them in a bit more detail. The Israelis had essentially three objectives with this war. One was successful, the two others were not. The successful one was that they finally, from their perspective, managed to get the United States to go to a direct war with Iran. This is something that they had tried for more than 20 years and they had failed. Now, finally, they did. Trump went into the war. He bombed Fordo and Natanz. But the Israelis had hoped that he would be much more deeply involved in the war rather than just a one-off. But nevertheless, it was a success. The two other objectives were failures. They thought that they could decapitate the regime, similar to how they had managed to inflict significant damage on Hezbollah with the pager attacks. And even though they were quite successful in the early hours of the war, they assassinated a large number of senior Iranian military officials, their families, scientists, etc. These were nevertheless rather quickly replaced, and Iran's command and control was never really fully disrupted. And then, of course, we saw that the Iranians went on the offensive with their missile attacks, of which many of them did go through the Israeli air defense systems. The third objective is the most important one, and the reason why I think they will start the war again. Their objective in the long run is to reduce Iran into another Syria, another Lebanon, a country that Israel can bomb at will, with impunity, and more importantly, without American involvement. Right now, they cannot do that. They have to have extensive American involvement to attack Iran because of Iran's missile capabilities that they need the Americans' support for defending against. And I don't think the Israelis thought that they would be able to reduce Iran into Syria in one attack. I think they, from the outset, thought that there would be several phases to this war. But I think they thought that they would have achieved more in this phase than they did. But having started it now, they cannot afford to stop from their own standpoint, because if they give Iran too much time, Iran will rebuild its air defense systems, perhaps buy better ones, perhaps manage to get rid of some of the Mossad presence inside the country, and eventually will also hit the American midterm election season, which will complicate Israel's calculations and Trump's calculations. So as a result, I do think that before December, there's a high likelihood that they will strike again. I think the next war, however, will be very different from the first war.
Two other issues over here that I want you to factor in when you make that prediction. The possibility of snapback sanctions on Iran that's currently being negotiated in the UN as we speak. And also this latest tweet that came from the Iran Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, where they've achieved 60% uranium enrichment, even though he says that they don't intend to pursue the bomb. How much of these two things will also, do you think, are also being weighed in Tel Aviv for a possible second conflagration?
So these are very important factors. The snapback provides a political lubricant for the Israelis to do an attack. It is, however, not necessary for them. If the Israelis believe that they have an opening and a necessity from their standpoint, from their calculations, they will do so, snapback or no snapback. In fact, the Israelis wanted to attack back in February, and Trump said no to them, and the attack ended up becoming in June. So any political excuse may be helpful, but it is not necessary. The snapback, I think, is problematic in many different ways, but there's a different element there. We're happy to discuss that as well. The Iranians, I don't what I saw that the Supreme Leader had said is that he had essentially ruled out any direct engagement with the United States. And I think that statement must have come because within their system, there must have been an intense debate as to whether there should be some sort of an accidental conversation between Trump and Pezeshkian, since both of them are in New York right now. And I think this statement came down essentially to prevent that from happening. I do believe we are in a scenario, however, this is not an endorsement of what the Supreme Leader said or anything like that, but I think we are in a scenario right now, a very unusual scenario in which diplomacy may actually speed up the transition, the movement towards a new war. And the reason I say this is Trump is under the impression that the Iranians essentially are so weak that they have to capitulate. His only interest in diplomacy at this point is to get the capitulation confirmed. He's miscalculating because that's not where the Iranians are at. Whether they are that weak or not doesn't matter. They're not going to capitulate. And then, of course, Trump is a very impatient person. If you have talks now, they will fail under these circumstances when the position of the two parties are so far away from each other. And failed diplomacy at this point will dramatically increase pressure on Trump to take military action. Under normal circumstances, when parties have their positions far away from each other, diplomacy can still be helpful because it could be useful towards bridging the gap between their positions. That is not the case here. And instead, you're going to have a scenario, I fear, that the failed talks will dramatically increase the likelihood of taking military action. So if you start the talks now, given the fact that Trump's general attitude is that he's resolved the issue, he's obliterated the program, and the issue is off his desk. If you have diplomacy started again, it brings the issue back to his desk. And if it fails, which I think it will under the current circumstances, the diplomacy will then transition to military action. So it would actually, instead of adding time to the clock, it actually speeds up the clock towards military action.